morning, ladies and gentlemen. Whilst World Tourism Forum is all about reshaping economies through tourism, with a specific focus on the developing countries, we also recognize the responsibility to mitigate the negative impact of travel and tourism on the sensitive biodiversity of these countries. Some with vast lands of rainforest habitats, and by some estimates, tropical rainforests cover only 7% of the Earth's land surface, but contain over 50% of the world's wildlife. The tourism industry can harm wildlife, plants, and natural ecosystems through habitat destruction, pollution, overexploitation of natural resources, and visitor traffic to sensitive ecosystems. Tourism is not the only destroyer of these mass natural habitats. Every second, more than 1 hectare of tropical forest is destroyed or drastically degraded, according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, threatening the survival of many species. Illegal logging is the biggest contributor to deforestation, which in turn contributes to climate change. With the world's rainforests now shrinking so fast that they may be gone by 2100, the need for ways to prevent illegal logging and monitor forest wildlife is urgent. In order to create awareness and help raise an alarm over this urgent matter, World Tourism Forum Institute has forged a unique alliance with a very special NGO out of San Francisco, USA. Topher White is the CEO and founder of the nonprofit Rainforest Connection. I thank you for this partnership and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. It's a really wonderful thing to be on. Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's get started. According to the UN, up to 90% of logging in tropical rainforest is illegal. Deforestation accounts for 17% of all global carbon emissions, the greatest species extinct crisis since the time of the dinosaurs. Historic droughts affect upward of 20 million people in some major cities, which are directly impacted by the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. The destruction of indigenous reserves, which comprises 20% of the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. Economic losses of GDP 2 to 5 trillion per year attributed to downgrading rainforests to land use. Topher White, you experienced this firsthand after visiting a rainforest preserve in Borneo. You were particularly taken aback by someone sawing down a tree just a few hundred meters from a ranger station intended to defend the very same area. You discovered the sounds of the forest, the squawks and the shrills of various animals. They acted as a cover up for the sound of the logging. On your return to the US, you decided to do something to plug this gap. Tell us of that moment when you felt this is your calling. How long back was this?
So this was actually back in 2011 when I visited the rainforest in Borneo in Indonesia for the first time. And it was really kind of bad. You know, you get struck by the fact that there is this sort of cacophony of noise. My background is much more in technology and physics at the time. I was living in France working at a fusion laboratory called ITER. But I'd always been kind of interested in this idea around Internet of Things, of technology that can be used to sense and detect things in our world, whether it be for industrial purposes or personal home purposes or natural purposes. But it sort of came about as this idea, like you said, walking through the forest in this given reserve, and stumbled upon with a group, with the head of the NGO, somebody who was cutting down a tree, just about 5 minutes walk from a ranger station. And it wasn't that the rangers were working with the loggers. It was just that it's very difficult, and it is quite difficult to actually monitor large swaths of forest, large areas, because it's difficult terrain, and the sound doesn't necessarily travel through them. And so, but it came from this idea that you can, even though people themselves can't pick the sounds of chainsaws out of a forest very well, computers are pretty good at that. And so there was no running water, no electricity, no roads in this area, but there was cell phone service, as there is in many areas throughout the world. And so the thought was that we could use old cell phones to pick out the sounds using technology, using software essentially to pull it out. But it wasn't really, at the time, I was really just trying to solve one problem for this one NGO in this one place in Indonesia. And to be fair, it took well over a year to build the first version of that for them. But as you mentioned, this is really a global issue, a global problem. I think you cited 90% of rainforest logging throughout the world is illegal, according to Interpol, and by extension, other organizations they work with. And if 50 to 90% of the legal logging of logging is illegal, then there's a mandate to stop it. And even though it is true that that deforestation is of course not all from legal logging, illegal logging is so profitable that it's one of these sort of gateway activities. So they'll go in to take out the very high-priced wood, and they won't necessarily clear-cut the forest, but they'll go in to take the high-priced wood. In doing so, they'll create a road. And once the road is there, that's when pretty much anyone else can get in to then exploit and tear the forest down.
It still amazes me because you didn't intend to be in that forest that day in Borneo. That that logging is something that you will pick up to work upon, as your future calling. So you must have been very young then.
I was not nearly as young as you might think. I think I was still in my 30s at that point, and I'm still in my 30s now. So I think I was probably about 30 years old at that time.
Okay.
2011 or 29 maybe, and I would say that it was definitely not what I was there for. I was there to sort of see and view nature and work with gibbons, these amazing large apes, most amazing apes there are, I think. And but when you see a problem and you see people who are willing to stop it, and you think that you can help them out, then it's easy to want to do that.
That's incredible. So being a physicist and an inventor, you started Rainforest Connection, your solution included using commonplace technology that was easily available at that time. And even now, old mobile phones and solar panels turn into forest guardians. I mean, that's just sounds out of a sci-fi movie, but it isn't. Can you talk about this incredible and yet simple technology to us?
Sure. Thanks for that the introduction there. I'd say that the technology, we sort of stumbled upon these tools by trying to put things together more simply. I by no means assumed that I would use old cell phones at the beginning. I didn't think we would do that. But as we started to build something out and build the steps in place, you realize that you can get an old cell phone on eBay for like $5, and that was a much easier way to do it. And because my background is much more in software engineering, it was easier to build software for a phone than to build an entire piece of hardware from scratch. But it was a lot harder than I expected it to be to build this thing out. We had to figure out ways to generate solar power under a tree canopy because it's pretty dark in the forest. We had to find ways to analyze the sound in ways that I had not expected, and sort of implementing artificial intelligence and other ways to pull out the sounds of chainsaws from the forest. We had to figure out ways of getting these cell phone signals out from 20, 30 kilometers away from a cell phone tower. These are things I took for granted originally, and it took us years to get these things right. But fortunately, as with any startup, any technology, if there's a need for it that's driving you to get it done, and people who are waiting and pulling you to implement it, then you will solve those problems. And so we're very fortunate that the problem that we were trying to help address and the people that were trying to help do it in the field, they needed it a lot, and so they kept pulling us to implement it. So we didn't have to wait to get it perfect in order to get it out there, and we still are far from perfect in how we do it.
Okay, so the vastness that makes the Amazon rainforest so diverse and fertile also makes it extremely difficult to protect. While use solar-powered second-hand phones as listening stations that could alert authorities to sound of illegal logging is one approach. The approach is limited to what you can get the phones to detect.
Sure.
Whilst the original idea and technology is still in play, applying machine learning has supercharged your network's capabilities. How?
Oh, well, so what's amazing about it is that sound is like the essence of the forest. You're there and it's just overpowering. There's sounds of monkeys, the sounds of birds. In fact, I'll send you some examples that you can include in this video. And the sound of chainsaw becomes this very small little noise in the background if you're lucky. But you want to be able to pull it out. And it really does travel through the forest pretty well. If you're putting up a camera in the forest, you can only see what's right in front of you, right? Just a few meters in front of you. That's basically what you see. But animals, because they live there and everything else in the forest travels, they use sound to communicate over great distances. And so all you have to do is put up one phone with a microphone on it and solar panels, and you can pick up things that are happening, multiple kilometers, in radius. And so that's where sound really becomes the superpower in the forest itself. But For many years, we put up old cell phones in the forest. We still put up devices in the forest that use cell phone software, but we're getting much better at sort of capturing this, compressing it, sending it out in real time up to our servers in the cloud. And that's where we implement artificial intelligence. And so we use all sorts of different layers upon layers upon layers of artificial intelligence. But most importantly, it's we use this thing called convolutional neural networks to, basically decode the sounds of chainsaws within the forest, pull it out, and then we send alerts to local people on the ground. So that's indigenous tribes, NGOs, and governments who then are able to review the data in semi-real time and respond and actually do something about it. At the end of the day, that's the biggest step, right? Because we can detect a chainsaw, but that doesn't do any good if there isn't somebody there on the ground to do something about it.
That's just incredible. You have to excuse me if I'm all bright-eyed about it, because for a layman who's not in technology and who don't live this on day-to-day basis, this is this just seems to be the solution to save the planet, so to speak. So somebody actually doing something about it is in itself is quite heartwarming. So tell me, illegal logging is a 100 billion global industry. Forest crime isn't an isolated event. It's an everyday event. Usually loggers fell trees from protected land and then mix the logs in with wood obtained from legal concessions. However, the vast quantities of illegal timber being sold make it impossible for governments not to know that much of the wood they approve for export or import is illegal. How does Rainforest Connection stop this illegal logging? Why? I mean, why in real time? Why are these alerts so important? Once these alerts are received, then what happens? What's the next step?
Yeah, well, you brought up a very good point, which is there is no single solution to illegal logging. Obviously, it's a market-driven industry, $100 billion illegal black market industry, which is really staggering. At the same time, like you sort of mentioned, the way in which the logs get cut, the trees get cut, they get inserted into the legal supply chain, and then it's hard to detect them. There's lots of interesting organizations who are working on ways to track timber from the point where they get cut through to where they end up, sort of in a port of entry, so that you can know whether incoming wood is illegal or not. Right. What we're focused on is not so much the import and trade process, so much as the actual logging process itself. And so what we're trying to do is not just make it possible for local communities who may not be law enforcement, who may not even be commercial entities, to be able to know when illegal logging is taking place and incentivize them to go stop it. So it's a $100 billion industry that you put it, but the local people are usually not benefiting from that almost at all. It's usually cartels, it's large groups that are benefiting and taking advantage of people on the ground. And so you'll have instances of indentured servitude, instances of slavery, instances of really toxic cultural instances where people themselves are taken advantage of by these instances. If you can get local communities to actually fight against it, they often will. The real-time element for us is extremely important because in situations we've seen, it's safer if you show up faster. And so it requires extraordinary courage, and it's a dangerous situation to get an alert, jump on your motorcycle, jump in your car, and go stop illegal loggers. The people that we work with are putting themselves in danger to do that. But we can show with the data from various projects that the sooner you show up, the safer it is. If you can stop a logging truck because we sent an alert that says a truck is going in, right. If we can send an alert and someone can show up and stop the truck on the way into the reserve and turn it around, and nobody has to get arrested. There's no reason for violence. There's no reason for arrests. But if you catch somebody hours later when the truck is leaving or when the truck is already filled with wood, then at that point, the damage has been done, a major crime has been committed, and you have to arrest people. And that raises the stakes for both people. Right. So the faster we can show up. Oh, right. Please.
Yeah, and the danger is so much more escalated at that point.
It's true. It's true. Additionally, what we have to do is build extra value in the forest. So one of the interesting side effects of a technology that we're trying to prove is that we are streaming these live audio feeds out of these really remote, amazing natural spaces. Wow. And one of the issues with the forest is how do you, in a certain sense, build extra value in it and monetize it for local people. So through the apps that we put out, through different things we're trying to institute around sustainable supply chain, can we make it possible for these audio streams themselves to be monetizable to benefit the people on the ground? So that almost the sounds and the audio and the liveliness of the forest becomes almost a commodity that you can offer to people around the world, the entire planet, to help to build value for the local people there. because if there's more value in the forest, there's less likelihood that it will be allowed to be exploited for illegal logging.
So that's really well explained, Topher. Thank you very much for that. Because again, I'm trying to visualize, for our viewers, that what the process looks like, from the moment they get the alert. So human activity and land use change are dramatically altering the sizes, the geographical distribution and functioning of biological populations worldwide, with tremendous consequences for human well-being. Yet our ability to measure, monitor, and forecast biodiversity change, which is crucial to addressing it, remains limited. Under these circumstances, global biodiversity monitoring is crucial, but it's a challenging task, as composition of biological populations at all taxonomic levels, they change. You spoke about biodiversity monitoring using acoustic monitoring. Tell us how this works.
Yeah. Well, one of the points you brought up there was about how the loss of forest actually does affect human health, global health, biodiversity health. This is true. I mean, when you lose a forest in an area, you lose rain. When you lose a forest in an area, you lose livelihoods for people as it relates to game that they can do. So basically, loss of a forest can in many ways affect people all over in that region, and not even just locally. Now, sometimes it's quite distant. And if you look back in the history of sort of human civilization, you'll see entire civilizations that rose and fall based upon their destruction of forests around them, everywhere from Latin America to North America to all over the world. And it's just sort of a pattern that we can try not to repeat at a global scale. But within biodiversity of the forest itself, this for us is almost a new and really exciting frontier. It goes without saying that when you're in these rainforests, when you're in any forest, any ecosystem, there is a sort of a fabric of nature that's there. There's animals, there's species, there's everything. And it turns out that when people aren't there, these animals are using sound to communicate. This is one of the things that's been very sort of underappreciated in everyday experiences around the forest, because humans aren't that great at decoding sound. We're great at decoding when we talk to each other, but we're really visual creatures. And so it's also the issue with sound is that sound is temporal. So sound takes place over long periods of time, and you have to sit there and listen to it to figure out what you're trying to catch. But because we're capturing all of these audio streams in the cloud and we're saving them and we're able to analyze them using AI and other techniques, what we're able to show is that AI can actually sift through years, or weeks, months, years of audio, and look for specific species, look for specific things, and then map that over time. And so we're able to combine AI and bioacoustics, which is again a very old field. This like bioacoustics. How do you study biology and acoustics with sound? We're basically combining these things together, and it's almost like a new era, as exciting as the invention of the microscope. Like when someone invented the microscope, we were able to peer into elements of nature that no one had imagined were there because they're so small that we can't see them. Likewise, with sound and with the ways in which animals communicate and talk to each other and almost talk to themselves, we can begin to look into the way that nature interacts in the ecology in ways that people themselves cannot perceive using AI. And so we're really excited about this. And again, it's all part of this effort to both understand the forest and build extra value in it for the people there, so that at the end of the day, there's no need to cut it, because a forest living should be worth far more than a forest cut down.
Through this process of interviewing you, I learned about these acoustic sounds of the forest. And yesterday I was listening to so many, there's tons of examples available, and it's pure magic. It's pure magic, absolutely.
Thanks. Well, one of the things we want to show is that every single one of these devices, these phones, we call them guardians, you put up in the field. It's totally possible for anybody to download our app, Rainforest Connection.
Yes, I did.
And you can listen live.
Yes, I've done that. Thank
Excellent.
you. So biodiversity is vital for tourism. Of course, mountains, rivers, and forests are major attractions for tourists around the world. However, biodiversity is under pressure worldwide and has suffered severe losses as more land is converted for human use from a natural state. And these human uses become more and more intensive. According to current estimates, 60% of the world's land surface is now managed in some way or another for human use. The loss of biodiversity that has accompanied this intensification of the environment is measured in the loss of key ecosystems such as forests, wetlands, or coral reefs, and in the growing number of species that are threatened with extinction or which have already become extinct. The rate of this extinction today is reported to be up to 1,000 times more greater than the natural rate, and ecosystems are functioning less effectively. And yet the paradox here is to help reverse this. Tourism sector can be vital to reduce impacts on biodiversity and to support conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with this? Do you think the tourism has a role to play? And can you share some examples of it?
Sure. Well, I think it's safe to say that I am an example of how tourism, if you believe that what Rainforest Connection is doing is worthwhile, I'm certainly an example of how tourism can make a difference. I was, in effect, a tourist. I was a volunteer, but I was a tourist in Indonesia, seeing this issue. And again, it doesn't make sense for me to barge in and try and claim that I have a solution to this. At the end of the day, the solutions are the people there on the ground. But tourism was what exposed me to what they were dealing with and allowed me to offer some degree of help in what they're trying to do. And that's, I think, a really important part. You know, if you want to know where you come from the best, or know who you are best, you need to travel and see the rest of the world for what it is, and find ways by which
That's a great message.
And find ways by which you can contribute. There's a mantra in Silicon Valley that you should solve your own problem because you know your own problems the best. But if it turns out that there's not a huge number of problems that exist that I can address, you know, it's one thing to work on an app that allows me to cut the taxi wait time from 8 minutes to 6 minutes, which is really, really hard. But is it actually a great use of everyone's time to do this, or for me, versus being able to help somebody know that a chainsaw is going off 100 meters away from where they live, or, you know, a kilometer away from where they live. That's a problem that I can address, but it's not my problem, it's theirs. And if I want to address climate change, I can't be the one to do it. They're the ones who can do it by actually stopping the forest from being cut down. So sometimes solving a simple problem happening from somebody on the other side of the planet, which you only know about because you saw it and visited them, that becomes very important. At the same time, I'd say that tourism is really, really important for really experiencing what the world has to offer. We think that we can offer a window, a connection into what's happening on the other side of the planet through our audio streams and through the rest, and through the analysis that we can provide. But obviously, it's nowhere close to actually being there and seeing nature for what it is. And so I think that at the end of the day, it's the democratization, it's this sense that the really important natural spaces belong to the whole world. That's the point at which we'll really work to protect them. Certainly they belong to the countries where they are. The people who live there have the greatest ownership over them, but the rest of the world needs to feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for keeping them. And that usually comes from seeing them in person as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that insight, Topher. So coming down to the current COVID-19 crisis, with fewer planes in the sky and cars on the road, lockdown has brought many benefits to the environment. Mm-hmm. You might be forgiven for thinking that the global lockdown measures keeping us all at home can only have been good for these environments, for the rainforests in particular. But in the world's tropical forest regions, it's another story. So why is it harming tropical rainforests?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, even with all of the decline in sort of carbon outputs you see over the past few months, at the end of the day, we've only dropped to a carbon output equivalent to 2016, I believe. So for all of the decline that we've seen, it's only accounting for the difference in outputs from over the past 14 years. So it's actually pretty impressive to see how much more output we've increased over the past 15 years. At the same time, what we try and show, obviously we're a technology company. We are not trying to say that we should rescind technology and that's the way to save the planet. We think that a very strong and civilized, a very strong civilization, a very like strong economy around the world, and technology in the hands of the right people is the best way to actually protect these environments. And so generally a breakdown in economies, a breakdown in livelihoods, a breakdown in law and order is not a good thing for the environment as far as we're concerned. And I think we're seeing that. So in a lot of these places where the sort of governments and law enforcement have fewer resources to operate with, they're dealing with a major crisis, a major humanitarian crisis as it relates to major health crisis, I should say. You're going to see them pay less attention to environmental crime. And so in the forest, you see an uptick in illegal logging and illegal exploitation. Okay. And it's easy to sympathize with that because people are really suffering and they need to find ways to make livelihoods. So the sooner we can get back to a place where an economy is thriving, where people are well taken care of, where they aren't fearing for their own livelihoods and their families, the better. And environmental crime usually takes place when there's a lack of transparency. So these, the environment suffers in darkness.
Yeah, and we've seen there's tons of videos available online. People are posting of wild animals coming onto the main cities or villages or roads. They're coming out of their natural habitats, and that alone itself is not safe for these animals as well, right?
It's true. I mean, they're bound to be curious and try and figure out where all the people went. At the same time, we think that there's no way that we're going to force human society to become smaller overall, right? So we have to find a way by which, nature and society can exist side by side, not necessarily intermixed, but side by side. And so we really press on the ability for these very lively natural reserves to exist right next to cities, and that can be shown to work. But again, that comes from both of those two being very healthy. You have to have a healthy society and a healthy ecosystem side by side. Otherwise, they tend to bleed into each other and extract from each other.
Absolutely, you are so right there. So rainforests are the most productive and most complex ecosystems on Earth. There's no doubt about it. They are home to more than half of all life forms on our planet, yet cover less than 2% of the Earth's surface. There is something even called a rainforest symphony. How can we eavesdrop on these magical sounds? You often talk about bringing the sounds of the rainforest to the people. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, again, we want to combine the resources that we have available to us now. Like, what does the world have? It has people who care about nature all over the planet. They may not be able to visit in these places right now, but they can certainly tune in. So through our apps and through other things that we actually will launch in August around bioacoustics, you should be able to listen in and hear not just the live sounds of the forest, but look back years and hear what it sounded like, years ago. And so if we can combine these really sort of experiential interfaces with the ability to sort of analyze and pull the really exciting moments out of nature. There's so many exciting things happening all the time throughout the planet, through all the places that we're streaming audio from, all the places where we're installed, that at any given time, it's sunrise somewhere. You can listen, it's sunrise at any given time at some Rainforest Connection Guardian. Like, you should be able to listen in and hear the birds waking up, hear the monkeys waking up, hear the apes waking up. And we should be able to sort of pull you into those experiences based on exciting moments that happen through analysis. So what we hope in the near future is that you can be, throughout your day, you can be pulled in for the most exciting moments happening anywhere around the planet in nature, and that becomes a part of your sort of daily routine.
So do you think there could be a role for VR in there?
Oh, certainly, yes. I mean, I think that's, again, goes with this idea, maybe VR is one thing, augmented reality is another. What are the ways by which we can make the natural world, perhaps even something happening on the other side of the planet, be a sort of a natural part of your daily routine? That's the point at which that becomes an indispensable resource that the entire world wants to maintain and keep. And even just the fact that they're watching it, they're listening to it, that they're aware that it's there, protects it. Right. It goes without saying. Tourism is a great example of this. What Europe and the United States and these wealthy societies are able to pay attention to, the rest of the world is willing to protect. And so we have to make a case for why it's worth paying attention to. And that's not just coming from bad news, saying there's a chainsaw, there's this many things happening, this many hectares are destroyed every week, every day, every hour. It's about saying, look, these are the magical and amazing things happening in these ecosystems that still exist. And if we can pull you into those precise moments, they become part of who you are, we're fairly confident they will be protected.
Yeah. So let's talk about the business side of it. I'm a businesswoman. I'm really interested in that part as well. So the environmental issues continue to dominate the global agenda of international donor agencies as more and more funding is allocated to address them. We've seen a spike in that. Agencies are seeking out strong NGO participation in developing countries and are actively supporting them with new grants and other resources. Environmental organizations have a long list realize that sustainable finance is a prerequisite for sustainable development. A lot of startup NGOs die because they cannot get this aspect right, okay? That how to get the funding right. Your organization is a role model for many in this regard. Relying on Kickstarter fundraising, to where you are now, not only you have managed regular stream of funding, but you are a magnet for many Fortune 500 companies as well. A lot of people would love to understand how these projects get funded. What is your business model?
Our business model is trying to be as diversified as possible. I mean, again, we're trying to offer solutions, but those solutions don't just apply to people in the forest or governments. You know, it's not just always who's going to pay for it. It's about who wants it and who wants to get to the people that want it. So we believe very strongly, we have the advantage that we deal in data, right? Is that we try our best to analyze the data, but essentially what we produce is data. We produce this stream, these live audio streams from the forest, and we analyze that to produce insights that we can use to protect places, right? But at the end of the day, how else, if we're constantly trying to innovate on ways that we can use that data effectively to get more people involved. And so, like we say, that listening to live sounds of the forest, or pulling you into these things that, into these moments that we think are important, or analyzing them to apply to people that are on the ground so they can respond to alerts. Likewise, we are also trying to innovate or trying to push ways that what we're doing matters to the technology companies that can help push this forward. So in many ways, if you think about bioacoustics, we just sort of talked about this era as important as the microscope and discovering new elements of nature using AI. That's a really interesting sort of mission to get on board with for technology companies who are trying to find the next frontier of AI. We've reached this point where a human-based data is almost reaching a point of diminishing returns. But why not push into the new frontier? It's almost like the depths of the ocean or deep outer space. Nature, these rainforests, that's almost the next frontier of what AI can accomplish. And so being able to tell those stories and get people involved in those missions, I think is really important. And they end up benefiting because, again, at the end of the day, we're only proving the importance of the work they do in helping to make these discoveries. So yeah, I'd say that right now our funding is diversified across, like you mentioned, corporate partners, I think are really an important part of this, partially because they want to see their technology used in important ways, but also because they legitimately care. They really do care about what's there when the story is told correctly. Grants are really important for getting it out there. Small donors make a big difference. And of course, donors on the large scale as well contribute to our work. But we are really interested in ways by which the very idea of sustainability becomes a growth market. So at the end of the day, sustainable supply chain, if it will, like, you know, products that come out of the forest, whether it be palm oil, sustainable palm oil, whether it be coffee or any of these other, or chocolate, cocoa.
Right.
What are ways by which these products, when sustainable, can be a better consumer experience than those that are not sustainable? Because that's a big complaint. So if we can find ways by which the data streams that we are create a new customer experience, like as you're drinking your coffee in the morning, can you listen in live to the very lively forest that your coffee was grown in, versus the dead forest that unsustainable coffee was grown in? If we can improve the consumer experience, the consumer sort of, what the consumer gets out of a sustainable product versus a non-sustainable product, then we will have almost created a new growth market for sustainability. And that's what we're trying to prove as well.
And you are right. It's the consumers who are now demanding more. You know, there is enough information out there to educate people on what's going on. And we are all kind of, and I think that the virus has kind of shown us that we are all kind of connected. We are in the global village space. Yeah. You know, there's a symbiotic link, and it doesn't matter your race, color, creed. Everybody can get infected. You know, and in a lot of ways, COVID has, I think, fast-tracked some of these technologies as well. You know, and the words like AI or virtual reality or something, you know, for common man were not that common up to this point. And now I think your product is a real showcase where it's bringing together all of these technologies onto one platform, and it was happening. It's already happening. So it's just incredible.
But the more that we can actually connect people to what's happening on the other side of the planet, and they believe that more now than they did before. You know, that's what tourism is all about. Yeah, tourism is obviously a travel industry, but there's a lot more that goes into it than that.
Yeah, and visual evidence. I think you also providing a visual evidence of the work that you are doing. You know, so in real time, one can experience the benefit that you're bringing to the environment and to the earth, and that takes some of the guilt away as a human being. You know, okay, that something's being done. Something's being done.
Well, if you let me adding one thing, I hate to cut you off. You know, tourism isn't always about the moment when someone travels there. It's about how much they're able to continue to connect with it afterward. And that's really important to brands that sort of capitalize upon tourism as well.
Can you do some copywriting for me for tourism?
Exactly.
You put it so nicely.
Yeah, I mean, if someone travels to Ecuador to visit the birds, they want to continue to connect to that experience beyond the photos they took after they're done. And of course, the more they know that it's not just that moment in time that matters, that moment they were there, and that moment in time continues, more likely they are to come back.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they went to Ecuador in that year; it's that they went to Ecuador in that year, and they know it's still like that. And they want to go back in the future.
Yeah. So finally, I just want to ask you a little bit, how critical are your partnerships, local communities, governments, and others? And what are your plans to scale up and grow?
I mean, yes, our partners in the field are everything when it comes to impact. There's absolutely no protection of any forest that happens without our partners in the field, and they deserve all the credit for actually doing that. At the end of the day, we always started by working with smaller communities, so indigenous tribes of just a few thousand people, NGOs who are trying to protect a specific area, and only recently have we scaled up to larger government partnerships. But yeah, I think that we're at a stage now where we really can scale, hopefully to many dozens of more projects over the next year. We hope that in 2021, we'll be able to expand into 6,000 more square kilometers of forest and then sort of scale up from there. For us, it's big. At the moment, we're still involved in most of our actual deployments on the ground because our relationship with the local partners is very important. But hopefully over the next year or so, we will begin to be able to hand off the technology and just see what our partners can do without it, without our direct involvement.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, if anyone would like to work with us, I mean, we're very imaginative in ways that we're able to make these projects work. If you have a problem that you'd like to be able to solve as it comes when it comes to environmental monitoring for protection and threat detection, or just sort of bioacoustics, if you'd like to learn about the nature that's there, these are things that we want to be able to help you with. So please.
Okay, then that's a message right out there. Now, you know what I've gauged from this discussion is that you have very successfully brought in the mantra that some of these corporates today use is people, planet, and profit. In your organization, you've achieved it to some degree. You know, you've taken care of the people, which are the local communities. You're contributing to them. You're contributing to the planet, and as an organization, you have a good business sense, and you very clearly know where you need to be down the line. You know, the tropical rainforest is essential to our collective survival. It's where rainwater, oxygen, and critical medicines even come from. Yet it's disappearing at a rate of nearly 80 million acres a year. The entire Amazon could be gone in 50 years unless we act like how you have done. Topher White, your beautiful mind has managed to accidentally invent one of the most inspiring of AI technologies, saving our one planet and our one home, one alert at a time. For this, I thank you on behalf of myself and my grandchildren and all the future generations. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. That's very kind. That's very, very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.